In early 2020, a fisherman in Siaya County here in Kenya rescued a bird tangled in one of his fishing gear. As it turned out, the rescued bird was a migratory osprey that had flown over 6,000 kilometers from Europe into Kenya. The story of the rescued osprey quickly spread and was all over local and international news platforms. What drew public attention to the osprey was a small metal ring with inscription attached to one of its legs. Bird specialists in Kenya obtained data from the ring. The information captured revealed that the bird was ringed by a scientist in Helsinki, Finland. I know many of you are wondering, but why do scientists attach rings on birds? In this show, I will be taking you through a journey into the exciting world of birds. I will be talking to a specialist who will give us insights into bird ringing and migration. Hello guys, heading this exercise today is Titus Impoma from the ornithology section, National Museums of Kenya. Hello Titus.
Hello, Richard.
To start us off, what is bird ringing?
Richard, bird ringing is an exercise of catching live birds from the wild. Could it be from the forest or from wetlands? And then putting a metallic ring, we call it ring, from this side of, we trained from Europe, but in America they call them bands. There's a band around the leg. So whichever you get it, that ring on the leg has a lot of information. For example, our rings here, because they're from East African Natural History Society, they say Inform Museum Nairobi. And then on the ring, after Inform Museum Nairobi, there's also a number, a serial number for definite individual bird that has been ringed, has its own number. This is a number that you can track. After ringing, it's written in, and all the information is taken and kept in books and later in the computer, so you can trace each and every individual bird tagged with that ring. So when you, for example, when it's found somewhere with a ring, people can report the ring number, and then you can trace back and be able to understand when the bird was ringed, why it was ringed, and who ringed the bird. Yeah.
Nice. So Titus, why is ringing conducted? How is it done, and who conducts it?
Bird ringing can be done for various purposes if you ask the question why. For example, the main component that many people are focused on has been to study migration. Yeah. So for example, during migration of birds during winter, birds migrate from Europe to Africa, like now. Yeah. And then they'll leave Africa back to Europe when the winter is finished, and then when they're going back to breed. So if you put rings on the birds before they migrate each way, the people in the other region, especially for example, where the birds are wintering, might capture these birds in the nets. And then in that process, they can find the birds with the rings. Yeah. And because the rings indicates where the bird has been ringed, it can be able to tell you exactly where the bird was coming from and where it has landed, how long it has traveled, especially if it's from Europe, that's 6,000 kilometers to where we are now. And as we see here, we are seeing a lot of willow warblers, a small bird of about 8 grams. Yeah, so we can be able exactly to tell where some populations have come if we can get just 2 rings or 1 ring from the birds within your ringing station of the birds that have come from Europe. Same to Europe. When the birds leave back to Europe and we are doing ringing here, if they go with the rings on their legs and they happen to capture the birds, then they can be able to tell where the birds are going from. So they can know where the birds go for winter, and we can know where our birds go for breeding. Yeah, so we can be able to have that information. And because each country has got its own ringing coordination. For example, here we are coordinated by East African Natural History Society. So our rings say Inform Nairobi Museum. So when the bird is ringed, is found in Europe, there's only one Nairobi Museum in the world, and this is where we are now.
Yes.
So they can inform Nairobi Museum, then they read, by just reading that number, that's the ring number, that's the individual number of that bird. So we can be able to trace exactly what it is. Another reason why we ring birds, we can study, it's for especially studies. Yeah, you can, especially you want to study populations of birds in this compound, in this museum. So you can put out, or in a forest, or mostly in the forest. So you can put up nets to capture birds. And then after you've captured the birds, you can be able to understand how many birds have been, like you capture once, twice, or 3 times. Then with all these times you're looking at, you can be able to know if you have exhausted all the birds within your capturing region by looking at the rings, how many have been rings, how many have not been ring. So you can be able to tell exactly what population of birds you've captured in your area. If you have exhausted that population, it means you've ringed most of the birds. If you still see a lot of birds without rings, it means you've not exhausted the population. And also you can just study other things like longevity. We are able to study, to understand how long birds live by, because that information you put in the book, on the computer with the data and everything, it's a history of that individual that you've ringed. So you can follow it over years. And with this, we've been able to, for example, here in the museum, we've been able to see an olive thrush aging about 9 years, yeah, from the time it was ringed when it was young to that 9th year when it was captured, and so on. So you can be able to understand a lot of things about birds' movement, longevity, populations within a given area, and you can just also use it as a tool to monitor these birds over time. That when I talk about when do they migrate, when do they come back, how old, and so on. And you can also just use to mark who is around, yeah. Especially when you use other methods of studying birds like point counts or time species counts, and you feel that you've not exhausted all the birds you hear and you wanted everything, you could just put the nets within the bushes and where you cannot see birds a lot with the other methods, and then you can at least capture 2 or few birds that we had not seen during your observations.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So how is the exercise done?
Bird ringing is a technique. It's a science, it's a technique, it's an art.
Yes.
Not just anybody can walk up and put up nets. And it has to be controlled also, legally. Yeah. So you have to train on how to handle birds. Yeah. Birds are very sensitive when you are handling them. You have to know how long the birds will stay in your nets, how long you will stay with the birds on their hands, and so on. How you can approach the nets to remove the birds from the nets. Yeah. So this one takes a lot of training, and it takes a lot of patience when you're training, because you're working with the small birds, you're working with the different types of birds that can really sometimes bite your fingers and so on. So it needs a dedication. So that idea of putting nets in the thickets and capturing the birds and bringing them is a really technique. So beside that, just ringing alone, just taking that ring and putting on the leg, there are also other things you can study. You can study things like, let's say we take some other measurements, like we call them biological measurements. By looking at these measurements and comparing with the other populations elsewhere, you can understand if there are things like differences in wing length, or differences in tassels, or differences in head shapes and sizes, and so on. Then you can be able to tell some populations in this region are different from the population in that region because they have got differences in wing length and so on. And also, when you take measurements, you can be able to tell populations within birds, especially if I'm rigging a lot of willow warblers here, and I found some have got shorter wings and others have longer wings. So I can be able to ask myself, what could this be the reason? Maybe some birds that come from far North Europe, and then they need to have longer wing because they are migrating down to south, and maybe others have just come from southern Europe and they're just migrating within east. They are just reaching East Africa and not South Africa, so they don't need that long wings and so on. So you can be able to tell a lot of different logistics in this idea of birds movement by looking at that data you are having. Yeah. And also by you can understand other things like what is the bird doing in the, let's say physiologically or morphologically, what are the changes with seasons and so on in terms of how much fat does it put on before it migrates, you know, because you can only do this when you have a bird in hand. You can also look at things like molting structures, replacing of feathers, you know, when do birds replace feathers and why. Does this, do they get affected by climate? Do they get affected by food? Do they get affected by a lot of environmental activities or factors? And then we can factor in all these things when you want to look at that conservation of that population, yeah, within that area. Yeah.
That's nice. So, when a ring bird is found, what information is obtained from its ring? Where is this information used? How useful is this information?
Okay. I'll give you an example of the birds that have been found with rings recently or in less than maybe 3 years. For example, there was a bird that was found with a ring from Russia, and that was an eagle. It was a steppe eagle. It was found here in Nairobi and at a police station, and then it was brought here in the museum by Kenya Wildlife Service. So how did we know that it comes from Russia? Yeah, we know because they give it the ring number for the bird, and then the Russian ringing organization on that ring. That's the enough information. Our birds here have got Inform Museum, Nairobi, then the ring number. That's enough. So it means when I'm outside there and I've got a bird with a ring, I can report this. I can take all the details about the ring, yeah, the ring number, and where it says that inform the bird, and then I can send this information to museum. Yeah, from the museums they can be able to follow up, even if it's a bird from other countries, let's say from Europe, and you found it here. Just report it to museums, and if a museum is far away from you, you can report it to Kenya Wildlife Service, and then they can inform us. So if this bird is alive and it can fly, you just take information and release it. Yeah, but if it cannot fly, it's maybe exhausted or it's been disturbed, you can bring the bird to the museum with the ring. Yeah, then from here we can only get the information, and maybe if the bird has other problems, we can take to the vet, or the vet can work on it, and then it can be released back to the wild. Yeah, this information is very important because it can lead you to understand where the bird has come from. It can lead you to understand the status of birds in terms of migration. Yeah, is it from Europe or is it from local bird? When was it ringed? It can also tell you when the bird was ringed. It can be by coincidence, like a bird that was found in that flamingo that was found ringed 64 years ago. Yeah, with a ring. It was ringed young in like Magadi, but it was found some few years ago. So the ring can be traced back when the bird was ringed, and you can be able to age the bird. And then it can give you some scientific information on longevity of the bird. As citizen science, most ringers are not scientists. Yeah, so you need not to be a scientist to ring a bird, but you can understand the methodology and all that is required in ringing the birds. Then you can help in ringing the birds maybe in your local areas and so on after you obtain the qualification. Yeah, this information can be used to inform the conservation bodies now on status of the birds in terms of migration. They can be able to tell the conservation bodies, especially if the birds that we thought they were just here, we realize because of this ringing, or these birds can move from this place to another one. They can help us to understand the movement patterns of different birds. For example, if lesser flamingos are ringed, and now we are puzzling, we don't know where they go, how they do it. But if we ringed a population of lesser flamingos, probably we can be able to tell when they leave this place. Maybe the rings can be reported in the other areas. And it's not only the metal ring on the bird. You can also ring with a plastic colorings. colorings on the legs, which can be read from a distance. So these colors can be reported, especially when ringers ring and they can report that we've ringed these birds with these colors. The public can be used to disseminate information on the birds that have been seen with the rings. Then we can be able to tell where different birds are going. Like when the Rift Valley lakes are swelling up and flamingos are really being opportunistic in what they want to feed on, and we are realizing that some birds are on the sewage pools and so on. So such information can tell us where how these birds, the movement patterns of this bird, with the effect of the upwelling of the lakes in the Rift Valley. So ringing can play a very important role to inform, especially to inform the general public on as an awareness on what is happening on our birds. We can be seeing birds here, but we may not understand much about them. But when we read information on where they have come from, how the movements they are, and so on, we can be able to tell a lot of information because of ringing. Yeah.
So Titus, it has been a pleasure talking to you. But before we conclude, where can one go for access of information regarding bird ringing?
Oh, thank you, Richard. Very important. We are so lucky here in Kenya. We carry out ringing at National Museums of Kenya. And as the rings said in Form Museum Nairobi, our rings actually are coordinated by East African Natural History Society. So ringing actually is fun, yeah. And for those who want to join and learn, don't expect to come and start ringing the first day, but you can come and observe and learn here at the museum, where we organize this training and bird ringing every Tuesday morning. And sometime we may not do this because, especially when it's raining and muggy morning, may not do the ring because it needs when the weather is okay and the birds are flying. Then we are here every Tuesday in the morning.
Nice.
And also, ringers find a lot of pleasure, especially when they organize ringing, what we call ringing sessions. We can have ringing here museum and call it like a constant effort study site, yeah, where you capture your birds every this time with this number of nets, and then you get such kind of controlled data that you acquire every time. But you can do some what we call opportunistic ringing for fun. You can go like Karen Forest or Lulua and so on for a holiday or a weekend, or as a ringing group. With the nets, you set nets and then in the evening, when you're doing camping in the morning, you can open your nets and enjoy bird ringing. See how many birds you can find in such areas. See what interesting birds you can get there, different from what you've been catching from your constant effort sites. And then ringing also is just fun because, as I mentioned, you need not to be an ornithologist to ring birds. Policemen in Europe ring birds, yeah? People working for train service do their own leisure during as for ringing. And in Kenya, we are so lucky, like in Tsavo National Park in Kenya, whereby ringing started in 1969 until now. It's going on for only migratory birds. Then people want to learn more and they want to ring more, because in Europe people get their license, ringing permits or license, after handling some number of birds before they are allowed to go and ring on their own. And then you found that Kenya can be a place you can get more species, more birds, and also more diverse species, not only just from Europe, but also our own native species here, which you can use for your practice to be able to allow you to get your permit back at home. Then you find, if we had this passion in ringing, not necessarily because you can be a teacher, you can be a policeman, and you can just be with that passion of birds in nature, then you can be able to learn a lot about birds for your own. Then young kids also, we can also help the young kids, especially, not really just young kids, those people developing in university, and in our universities have got courses like wildlife management and conservation, and such courses really, people used to think that if I go in wildlife management, I'm going to manage big animals and so on. You can manage birds, yeah, you can learn to manage birds, understand birds, just like big animals. Birds have got their own issues, because if you go, birds have got their own conservation issues compared to big mammals, and like the big mammals, I mean. So you can do this and venture into ornithology and build your career. You can do this and venture into your hobbies and become a ringer. So it doesn't have a cutting point. Yeah, it doesn't have a cutting threshold, but you can do it at your own will.
It has been great interacting with you through this insightful session of bird ringing, one of the core activities coordinated by Nature Kenya, the East African Natural History Society. We welcome you on board. We walk together the journey of enjoying the thrilling experiences that abounds in our birding world by becoming a member of Nature Kenya.